The hum of the Daedalus was my constant companion, a low, thrumming vibration that resonated through the deck plating and into the bones of my boots. 247 souls lay frozen in their cryopods, oblivious to the symphony of the ship, to the eerie silence of deep space, and to the gnawing loneliness that was my only crewmate. I, Captain Ortis Lucas, xenobotanist and reluctant shepherd of this metal ark, was awake, by choice, by necessity. My shift, the shift really, was a solitary vigil. 6 months alone, monitoring the ship's systems, charting the unstable currents of the Siemens 6-star system, and tending to the hydroponics bay. My domain was a small, cluttered lab filled with the verdant life that represented our future. Genetically modified crops designed to thrive on the harsh, alien soil of Kepler 186f, our destination. The irony wasn't lost on me. I nurtured life while surrounded by the cold, vast emptiness of space, a constant reminder of the fragility of existence. The comm panel blinked, a rhythmic green pulse. Routine diagnostics. I tapped the screen, the familiar sequence of numbers and graphs unfolding before me. Everything nominal, too nominal. This sector of space was notorious for its volatility, rogue asteroids, unpredictable gravitational shifts, and the shimmering, almost invisible distortions we called space weaves. They were beautiful in a terrifying way, like watching a cosmic predator flex its muscles. My father, a veteran deep spacer, had called them God's hiccups. He and my mother had vanished in one 20 years ago. A routine survey mission, gone without a trace. I pushed the memory away, as I always did. Dwelling on it served no purpose. Instead, I focused on the task at hand. I checked the nutrient levels in the hydroponics bay, adjusted the artificial sunlight spectrum, and meticulously recorded my observations. The plants were my responsibility, my connection to something real, something alive, in this sterile metal tomb. Samson, my synthetic humanoid assistant, stood silently in the corner, his scarred face a mask of impassivity. He was a newer model, designed for maintenance and security, but his presence was unsettling. His movements were too fluid, his gaze too unwavering. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the ship. I paused, my hand hovering over a young sprout. It wasn't the usual hum. This was different, deeper. I glanced at the navigation console. Nothing. No proximity alerts, no gravitational anomalies. Just the endless black of the Siemens 6-star system, punctuated by the distant, cold light of unfamiliar constellations. I dismissed it as another quirk of this unstable region. Still, a prickle of unease lingered. My father's voice echoed in my mind, a whispered warning from beyond the grave. Space doesn't forgive mistakes, Ortis, and it especially doesn't forgive complacency. He always had an unsettling ability of being right. I turned my attention on the plants in front of me, examining the soil. The tremor returned, stronger this time. It wasn't a vibration. It was more like a shudder. The lights flickered, casting elongated, dancing shadows across the hydroponics bay. Samson's head snapped up, his synthetic eyes glowing with an unnerving intensity. "Captain," he said, his voice a monotone that still managed to convey a hint of something. Concern? I'd never heard that inflection from him before. Energy fluctuations detected, origin unknown. Before I could respond, the comm panel erupted in a cacophony of alarms. Red lights flashed, accompanied by a piercing, insistent klaxon. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a drill. I scrambled to the main console, my fingers flying across the controls. The screen displayed a chaotic jumble of data, but one line stood out, blinking ominously. Singularity event detected. Proximity. Critical. Singularity event? That wasn't possible. Singularities were theoretical constructs, points of infinite density and gravity. Black holes. We were nowhere near any charted black hole. And yet, a message scrolled across the screen, overriding the alarms. It was from Dr. Stone, the lead researcher, still technically in cryo, but his pre-programmed emergency protocols had triggered. Priority 1, message, Autius Lucas. Anomaly designated, Site 22 has manifested. Unpredictable behavior. Recommend immediate evasive maneuvers. Potential existential threat. Repeat, potential existential threat. Existential threat? My blood ran cold, that forbidden phrase sending chills all over my body. This wasn't a rogue asteroid or a space weave. This was something else, something far worse. Another tremor, even more violent than the last, rocked the ship. The Daedalus groaned, a sound like a wounded beast. I gripped the console, my knuckles white. My training, drilled into me since childhood, kicked in. Evasive maneuvers. But where to go? We were surrounded by the unknown, trapped in a cosmic maze of shifting realities. Then, I saw it. A flicker on the long-range sensors. A faint, distorted signal originating from somewhere within the Singularity's influence. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A pattern. No, not a pattern. A code. I stared at it, my mind racing. It wasn't random noise. It was structured, deliberate. It was almost like looking at it closer. A cry for help. My heart was beating faster, a strange sense of hope mixed with my terror. I knew what needed to be done. I had to respond. "Samson," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Prepare for emergency trajectory adjustment. We're going in." "Captain?" Samson's voice did a strange intonation. "That is highly illogical. The risk assessment. Override," I snapped. "We have a signal, a potential survivor. We can't ignore it." Even as I said the words, a wave of doubt washed over me. Was I being reckless? Suicidal? Or was this the very reason I'd chosen to stay awake, to face the dangers of deep space head-on instead of hiding in a frozen slumber? The ship lurched as Samson initiated the course correction. The Singularity, a swirling vortex of distorted light and impossible colors, loomed larger on the view screen. We were heading straight into the heart of the unknown. "Captain, I must protest." Samson's voice was flat but insistent. "This course of action contradicts all established safety protocols. The probability of survival is negligible." He was right, of course. Every fiber of my logical mind screamed at me to turn back, to put as much distance as possible between the Daedalus and the swirling chaos of Site 22. This was madness, suicidal. I was a xenobotanist, not a rescue pilot. My job was to ensure the survival of the colonists, not to risk their future on a faint, distorted signal from a Singularity. My hand hovered over the control panel, ready to abort the maneuver. My parents' faces flashed before my eyes, their final transmission echoing in my ears. Unforeseen anomaly, losing control, Mayday. Was I repeating their mistake? Was I chasing a phantom, a ghost in the machine, to my own doom? "We're talking about a potential life, Samson," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. "We can't just leave them." But even as I spoke, the doubts gnawed at me. Was it truly a distress signal? Or was it something else entirely? Something luring us in? The stories my father used to tell me about the dangers of deep space, the whispers of strange encounters and unexplained disappearances, flooded my mind. I glanced at the hydroponics bay, at the rows of carefully cultivated plants, the future of humanity resting on their delicate leaves. My responsibility, my real responsibility. Was I abandoning it, betraying the trust placed in me? My internal conflict was a raging storm, mirroring the cosmic tempest unfolding outside the ship. Fear, duty, curiosity, and a desperate hope for something more than the endless routine of my solitary existence battled within me. The decision weighed heavily, a crushing weight on my shoulders. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to find a shred of certainty in the swirling vortex of my own doubts. But there was none to find. The proximity alarms blared, pulling me from my internal turmoil. We were rapidly approaching Site 22. The view screen showed a swirling vortex of distorted spacetime, colors that shouldn't exist bleeding into each other. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. Suddenly a new voice crackled over the comms, cutting through the static. It was weak, distorted, but undeniably human. Daedalus, this stone, can you me? My heart leaped. Dr. Stone? But he was in cryo. How? Dr. Stone? This is Captain Lucas. I read you, but barely. What's your status? I shouted over the din of alarms. The response was a garbled mess of static and fragmented words, but I caught a few key phrases. Breach, containment, singularity, amplified. Then, a clearer, stronger voice, though still laced with static, replaced Stone's. It was older, more measured, with a strange, almost metallic resonance. Captain Lucas, you are approaching a highly unstable region. Your actions are ill-advised. Who is this? I demanded. Identify yourself. I am a caretaker, the voice replied. Of Site 22. Dr. Stone has awakened me. He believed assistance was required. A caretaker. Of a singularity. This was getting stranger by the second. But there was something in the voice, a weariness, a knowledge that compelled me to listen. This wasn't the voice of an enemy, at least not in the traditional sense. It was the voice of someone, or something, burdened by a terrible responsibility. Caretaker, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We received a distress signal. Are there survivors? A long pause filled only with the crackle of static. Survivors is a relative term, Captain. There are entities, changed by the singularity. Dr. Stone attempted containment. He failed. What kind of entities? I pressed, a growing sense of dread filling me. They were once like you, the caretaker said. Human, crew, of a vessel, much like this one, drawn in by the signal. The singularity alters. It enhances. It corrupts. The voice seemed to struggle with the last word, as if the concept itself was painful. And the signal? I asked. Is it a trap? It is a consequence, the caretaker said, a byproduct of the transformation it calls to others, like a beacon, a warning, and an invitation. Dr. Stone has more data you should examine. I can show you to his terminal. This caretaker was offering guidance, however cryptic. It was our mentor in this bizarre, impossible situation. A mentor born from the heart of a singularity. Okay, here's the fifth scene, crossing the first threshold of the Singularity Site 22 of Seaman 6 Star, continuing with the hero's journey template, aiming for approximately 600 words. Caretaker, I said, making the decision. We're coming in. Guide us to Dr. Stone's terminal and tell us everything you can. Very well, Captain, the caretaker replied. Prepare yourself. What you are about to witness will challenge your understanding of reality. The Daedalus plunged into the swirling vortex of distorted space-time. The view screen erupted in a cacophony of colors, impossible geometries and fleeting images that my mind struggled to process. It felt like being inside a kaleidoscope designed by a mad god. Alarms shrieked, the ship groaned under the immense gravitational stresses, and even Samson seemed to sway on his feet. Navigational systems are fluctuating wildly, Samson reported, his voice strained. Maintaining course is difficult. The caretaker is assisting, I said, watching as a series of complex equations and trajectories appeared on a secondary screen, seemingly out of nowhere. Follow that guidance. It's our only chance. The caretaker's voice, now clearer and stronger, echoed through the ship's comms, guiding us through the chaos. It spoke of resonance frequencies, dimensional shear, and quantum entanglement, concepts that were far beyond my understanding of xenobotany, but which somehow made a strange, intuitive sense in this warped reality. As we navigated deeper into the singularity, the fleeting images on the view screen became more distinct, more disturbing. I saw flashes of things, twisted, grotesque shapes that defied description. Bodies, or what had once been bodies, fused with metal and technology, writhing in silent agony. Faces contorted in expressions of unimaginable terror and ecstasy. These are the entities I spoke of, the caretaker said, its voice heavy with sorrow. The altered, the Singularity's children. I stared in horrified fascination, unable to tear my eyes away. This was the truth behind the distress signal. This was the fate that awaited us if we failed. A fate worse than death. A fate of eternal, twisted existence. We finally reached a relatively stable pocket within the Singularity's influence. The chaotic visuals subsided, replaced by a view of something. It was a structure of sorts. A vast, sprawling complex of metal and something else, something organic. It pulsed with a sickly bioluminescent light, like a cancerous growth on the fabric of reality. Site 22, the caretaker announced. Dr. Stone's terminal is located within the central structure. Be warned, Captain, the altered are aware of your presence. As if on cue, the structure began to shift, to change. Tendrils of metal and flesh snaked out, reaching towards the Daedalus. The alarms reached a fever pitch. "We're being targeted," Samson yelled. "Defensive systems are insufficient." I gripped the controls, my heart pounding in my chest. We had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back now. We were in the heart of the beast, face to face with the unimaginable horror of Site 22. Our journey to rescue anyone, anything, had become a desperate fight for survival. The tendrils lashed out, impacting the Daedalus with sickening thuds. The ship shuddered violently, throwing me against the console. Warning lights exploded across the control panel. "Shields failing!" Samson shouted, his voice distorted by the strain. He was at the engineering station, desperately trying to reroute power. "Multiple hull breaches. We cannot withstand another assault." "Caretaker," I yelled into the comms. "We need a way in, now." "There is a docking port," the caretaker replied, its voice calm amidst the chaos. "On the ventral side, but it is guarded." Guarded? By what? More of those altered things? I didn't have time to ask. I wrestled with the controls, trying to maneuver the crippled ship towards the location the caretaker indicated. The view screen showed the monstrous structure looming closer, its bioluminescent glow casting an eerie, unsettling light on the Daedalus. As we approached the docking port, I saw them. The guards. They were humanoid, in a twisted, grotesque way. Their bodies were a horrifying fusion of flesh and metal, limbs elongated and distorted, faces frozen in silent screams. They floated in the space around the port, their eyes, or what passed for eyes, burning with a cold, malevolent light. "They are aware of our intentions," the caretaker said. "They will attempt to prevent your entry." "Samson, weapons status?" I barked. "Minimal," Samson replied. "Energy weapons are offline. We have limited projectile capabilities." Projectile weapons? Against those things? It was a long shot, but it was all we had. "Target the ones closest to the docking port," I ordered. "Give us a clear path." Samson complied, unleashing a barrage of small, high-velocity projectiles. The weapons were designed for asteroid deflection, not combat, but they had some effect. The altered creatures recoiled, their bodies sparking and twitching as the projectiles struck. But they were numerous, and they were closing in fast. One of the creatures slammed against the view screen, its distorted face inches from mine. Its eyes filled with a mixture of rage and something else. Something that looked almost like pleading, stared into my soul. I recoiled in horror, a scream building in my throat. Then something unexpected happened. A beam of energy, bright and intense, lanced out from the structure itself, striking the creature on the view screen. The creature shrieked, a sound that was both mechanical and agonizingly organic, and disintegrated into a cloud of dust and metal fragments. "What was that?" I gasped. "The structure. It is defending you," the caretaker said, its voice tinged with surprise. "It seems Dr. Stone's influence remains." More energy beams fired from the structure, targeting the remaining altered creatures. They were being systematically destroyed, their bodies ripped apart by the powerful blasts. Within seconds, the space around the docking port was clear. "Docking sequence initiated," Samson announced, his voice still tight with tension. The Daedalus lurched forward, guided by the structure's own systems, and connected with the docking port with a jarring clang. We were inside, but the relief was short-lived. The moment we docked, the alarms intensified. A new warning flashed on the screen. "Containment breach. Biohazard alert." "What's happening?" I demanded. "The altered... They are not the only threat," the caretaker said. "The Singularity, it has created other things. Things less defined." A low, guttural growl echoed through the ship, followed by the sound of tearing metal. Something was inside the Daedalus. Something hungry. "Samson," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Arm yourself. We're not alone." The synthetic humanoid nodded, his hand morphing into a wicked-looking blade. He moved with a chilling grace, his eyes scanning the corridors. The hunt was on, and we were the prey. We had new challenges to face. The air grew cold, and a thick, viscous fluid began to drip from the ceiling. It smelled of decay and something else, something alien and indescribably foul. The growls grew louder, closer. We moved forward toward Stone's terminal and hopefully some answers, dread filling my very soul at every corner we turned. The corridors of Site 22 were a nightmare made real. Twisted metal, sparking wires, and pulsating organic matter merged in a chaotic, grotesque tapestry. The viscous fluid dripped everywhere, coating the floor and walls with a slick, foul-smelling slime. The growls and screeches echoed around us, growing closer with every step. "Caretaker," I said, my voice tight with tension. "What are these things?" "Byproducts," the caretaker replied. "Failed experiments. The Singularity attempts to replicate, to understand. It is not always successful." We moved cautiously, Samson leading the way, his blade glinting in the flickering emergency lights. We passed several sealed doors, each marked with biohazard symbols and cryptic warnings. I could only imagine the horrors contained within. Suddenly, Samson stopped, his head cocked. "Movement," he said. "Ahead." He pointed towards a large arched doorway at the end of the corridor. The growls were emanating from beyond it. The doorway was partially blocked by a tangled mass of metal and something that looked disturbingly like bone. "That's it," the caretaker said. "Dr. Stone's terminal is through there, but be warned, the Guardian is formidable." Guardian? What kind of Guardian? My mind conjured images of monstrous creatures, even more terrifying than the altered ones outside. I gripped my own weapon, a pulse pistol, standard issue for colony captains, but woefully inadequate against the horrors we'd already seen. "We have no choice," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We have to get to that terminal." Samson nodded, his synthetic face betraying no emotion. He moved towards the doorway, his blade raised. I followed close behind, my pulse pistol trembling in my hand. As we approached, the tangled mass blocking the doorway began to stir. It unfolded, revealing something. It was large, hulking, a grotesque amalgamation of flesh, metal, and bone. Its head was a skull-like structure with glowing red eyes and a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It let out a deafening roar, a sound that shook the very foundations of the structure. This was the Guardian, the final obstacle between us and the truth. The creature lunged, its massive claws swiping at Samson. The synthetic humanoid dodged with surprising agility, his blade flashing out, striking the creature's arm. Sparks flew, and the creature roared again, but the blade seemed to have little effect. I opened fire with my pulse pistol, aiming for the creature's head. The energy bolts struck, causing the creature to flinch, but they didn't penetrate its thick, armored hide. This was going to be a difficult fight, a desperate, terrifying struggle for survival in the heart of a living nightmare. We were so close to the answers, to understanding the mystery of Site 22, but this monstrous guardian stood in our way, a terrifying embodiment of the Singularity's power. The terminal was surprisingly intact, considering the chaos surrounding it. It hummed with a faint blue light, a beacon of order in this realm of madness. Samson immediately began working on it, his fingers flying across the controls with inhuman speed. "Accessing Dr. Stone's logs," he announced. "Stand by." I leaned against a nearby wall, trying to catch my breath. My body ached. My muscles screamed in protest, but the adrenaline was still coursing through my veins. I looked back at the doorway, at the still form of the Guardian. I had faced death and I had survived. But at what cost? The terminal beeped, and a holographic display flickered to life. Dr. Stone's face appeared, his image grainy and distorted. He looked tired, defeated. "This is Dr. Elias Stone, final log entry, Project Burial at Sea, a catastrophic failure. The Singularity, it's not just a phenomenon, it's alive. It learns, it adapts, it hungers." Stone's image wavered, then stabilized. "We thought we could contain it, control it, use it. We were wrong. The alien bodies, they were not just fuel, they were a catalyst. They awakened something ancient, something powerful." He paused, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and regret. "The signal, it's not a distress call. It's a lure. It draws others in, to feed the Singularity, to expand its influence. If you're hearing this, it's too late. Get out while you still can." The image faded, replaced by a string of complex equations and diagrams. "Captain," Samson said, "I have analyzed Dr. Stone's data. The Singularity, it is growing, expanding. At its current rate, it will consume the entire Siemens 6-star system within weeks. The reward, not a cure, not a weapon, but a terrifying truth, a revelation that changed everything. We were not just facing a localized threat, we were facing an existential crisis. The fate of the colony, of humanity itself, hung in the balance." "We have to warn them," I said, my voice hoarse. "The colony, Earth, everyone." Samson nodded. "The Daedalus is severely damaged. Long-range communication is offline. We must escape the Singularity's influence to transmit a warning." Escape. It sounded simple, but I knew it wouldn't be. We were deep within the belly of the beast, surrounded by horrors. And the Singularity was growing, its influence spreading like a disease. "Caretaker," I said, addressing the unseen entity. "Can you help us? Can you guide us out?" A long pause. Then, the caretaker's voice, weaker now, filled with a strange resignation. "I can assist, but the Singularity is aware. It will resist." As if to emphasize the caretaker's words, the structure began to shake violently. The growls and screeches of the things within the ship intensified. They were coming. "We have to move. Now," I said, grabbing my pulse pistol, its energy depleted but still a comforting weight in my hand. Samson led the way, his damaged body moving with surprising speed and efficiency. We retraced our steps, navigating the treacherous corridors, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind us. The viscous fluid on the floor was thickening, making it difficult to move. The walls seemed to pulse, to breathe. The entire structure was coming alive, trying to trap us, to consume us. We reached the docking port, but it was blocked. By them. The altered creatures, dozens of them, their distorted bodies blocking our escape. They were waiting for us. "This is it," I said, my voice grim. "We fight our way out. The escape will not be an easy one." We were trapped, cornered, outnumbered. But I wouldn't give up, not now, not ever. I raised my pulse pistol, its energy depleted, a useless gesture of defiance. Samson stood beside me, his blade damaged but still held firm. "Any ideas, Samson?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm despite the overwhelming despair. "One," he replied. "A highly improbable one." Before I could ask, he lunged forward, not at the altered creatures, but at the docking port controls. He ripped open the panel, exposing a tangle of wires and circuitry. "What are you doing?" I shouted over the roar of the approaching creatures. "Creating a diversion," Samson replied. He began to manipulate the wires, sparks flying. The altered creatures were almost upon us. I braced myself for the inevitable, closing my eyes, waiting for the searing pain, the oblivion. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard a deafening explosion. I opened my eyes, shielding them from the blinding light. Samson had overloaded the docking port's energy core. The resulting explosion had ripped through the ranks of the altered creatures, vaporizing them in a flash of intense heat. But the explosion had also damaged the Daedalus, severing our connection to Site-22. We were free-falling, tumbling through the distorted space-time of the Singularity. "Samson!" I yelled, grabbing onto a nearby railing. "What have you done?" "Calculated risk, Captain," he replied, his voice strained. "The explosion disrupted the Singularity's hold. We are escaping. But, there was always a but. The ship was in freefall, spiraling out of control. The alarms were screaming, the hull groaning under immense pressure. We were alive, yes, but for how long? Then I saw it. A flicker of hope. A small, stable pocket of space. Just ahead. A way out. "Samson," I said, pointing. Can you stabilize us? Get us there." Samson, his body battered and sparking, limped to the navigation console. He worked with desperate speed, his fingers a blur across the controls. The Daedalus shuddered, groaned, then slowly, agonizingly began to right itself. We were heading towards the stable pocket, towards freedom, towards a chance to deliver the warning. We had faced death, stared into the abyss, and somehow, miraculously, survived. We were resurrected, reborn from the ashes of Site-22, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain forever. We limped back into known space, the Daedalus a battered, scarred testament to our ordeal. The Singularity, a fading nightmare in our wake, was still out there, growing, consuming. We had escaped, but the threat remained. The moment we were within range, I transmitted Dr. Stone's data along with my own report to Earth Central Command. The response was immediate and frantic. Our message had shattered the illusion of safety, the comfortable lie of a controlled universe. The truth of Site-22, of the Singularity's hunger, was now out in the open. The reaction was mixed. Some dismissed it as the ravings of a traumatized captain and a malfunctioning synthetic. Others demanded immediate action, a preemptive strike against the Singularity. But most, I think, were simply afraid. I was placed under quarantine, subjected to endless tests and interrogations. Samson was dismantled, his memory core scrutinized for any trace of corruption. We were treated as both heroes and potential threats, our story a dangerous, unsettling truth that threatened to unravel the fabric of society. But the elixir, the knowledge we had brought back, was undeniable. The data, the recordings, the sheer visceral horror of our experience could not be ignored. Plans were drawn up, strategies debated. A desperate race against time had begun. I was eventually released, cleared of any wrongdoing, but forever changed. The nightmares still came, vivid and terrifying. I saw the twisted faces of the altered, heard the growls of the unseen horrors, felt the crushing pressure of the Singularity's embrace. I returned to my duties, to the quiet solitude of the hydroponics bay. But it was no longer a refuge, it was a reminder of the fragility of life, of the vast, uncaring universe that surrounded us, and of the horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of our perception. I took my work more seriously. The plants, once a symbol of hope, now seemed fragile, vulnerable, like humanity itself. But they also represented resilience, the will to survive, to adapt, to fight back. And as I tended to them, I knew that our journey, humanity's journey, was far from over. The Singularity was out there, waiting. but so were we. Scarred, yes, but not broken. And armed with the knowledge, the terrible, vital knowledge that we had brought back from the heart of darkness. The fight for survival was on. The horror faced wasn't truly gone. The fight has just started,